touch me!
You'll die out here.
Let the desert take me, it remembers our names! Don't die for me. Then what would you have me do?
Live, that's the harder thing.
Red Willow Valley, Arizona Territory, summer 1879. The wind came first hot metallic, carrying the taste of rust and memory. It swept over the valley like breath from a furnace, dragging red dust across a land that hadn't known mercy in months. Every blade of dry grass bent the same way, as if the earth itself were bowing to survive. Silas Hale hauled the bucket from the well with a slow, practiced pull. The rope sang against the wood, a weary sound. The bucket came up half full of ochre water, too bitter to drink, too precious to waste. He poured it into a trough for his mule, watched the animal drink, then tipped his hat against the glare. Nothing moved beyond the fence line. Nothing ever did. He lived that way, one man, one mule, one cabin, crouched against the shoulder of a low mesa. Routine had become his religion. Every sunrise meant the same litany. Check the fence, patch the roof, mend the saddle, draw water, count the hours until dark. Silence had edges here, and if you listened too long, it could cut you clean through. That evening, the silence broke. Hoofbeats, 3 of them, rolled down the dry creek bed like loose stones. Silas didn't move at first. Sound traveled strange in the heat, and sometimes what you heard was only what you feared. But then came the voices, sharp, laughing, unkind. He set the bucket down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and turned toward the dust. 3 riders crested the rise, Crow Larkins, Charlie Peaton, and a younger man he didn't know, thin as wire coat, too fine for this country. Crow rode in front, grin wide under a sun-bleached hat. He waved as if greeting an old friend. "Evening, Hale," he called. "Remember that horse we owed you brought your payment?" Silas frowned. "Didn't expect you boys to remember anything but your own thirst." Crow's grin widened. "Oh, we remember debts. Always pay 'em one way or another." He jerked his reins, and something heavy slid from the back of his saddle, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Dust rose, then settled enough for Silas to see a woman's hands-bound hair, matted with dirt and blood skin, the color of sunburned earth. She hit hard and didn't cry out, only lifted her head, once eyes black as obsidian, meeting his with a look that wasn't fear, just fire. Crow spat. "Debt settled." Silas's jaw tightened. "I trade in horses, not people. Trade's a trade." Crow shrugged. "You guided us through Apache country last spring, saved us from getting our scalps lifted. We owe you. You can do what you like with her. Sell her back, keep her, bury her. Makes no difference to us." Charlie laughed, dry, mean. "Think of her as company. Or confession." The young man snorted, already turning his horse. "Let's ride. Ain't healthy staying here after dark." The 3 of them wheeled around, boots kicking dust. Crow looked back, once eyes gleaming. "Take care, Hale. She bites." Then they were gone, swallowed by the red haze beyond the fence line. For a long minute Silas didn't move. The wind dragged the last echo of laughter away. Only the creak of the well rope remained. He stared at the figure in the dirt, still but breathing. The ropes had cut deep into her wrists, raw to the bone. Flies hovered where the blood had dried. He knelt, pulled his knife, and sawed through the bindings. She flinched, but didn't pull away. When the last strand fell, she lifted her head again. Sweat streaked her face, carving lighter lines through the dust. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse and low. "Don't touch me. You'll die out here," he said. "Then let the desert take me. It remembers our names." Silas sheathed the knife. "So do I." He stood, took a slow breath, then offered her the water bucket. She hesitated, suspicion in every line of her body. Finally, she reached out with trembling hands and drank. The sound of it, water against a cracked throat, was the only human sound in miles. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why give water to a slave?" Silas looked past her toward the dying sun. "'Cause I ain't the man they think I am." The wind shifted, bringing the smell of distant rain that would never arrive. He nodded toward the cabin. "There's shade inside. Rest a while." She didn't answer. When he turned to go, he heard her whisper something, words in a language older than the fence, posts softer than the dust. A prayer, maybe. Or a curse. Inside the cabin held the heat like a closed fist. One-room bedstove table rifle on the wall, a single window facing west. He lit the lamp, trimmed the wick, and fetched a tin cup. When she stepped in the light, caught the edge of her necklace string of clay beads, some cracked, one shaped like a circle within a circle. The pattern stirred something in him, an old recognition he couldn't place. She stood near the door, not crossing the threshold fully. Her shadow stretched long across the floor. "What's your name?" he asked. Silence. Then Aiyana. He nodded. Silas. The names hung between them like smoke. He poured a little water into the cup and set it on the table. "Drink slow. It's brackish." She did. The water caught the lamplight, trembling like her fingers. When she finished, she set the cup down carefully, aligning it with the table's edge. "You were a soldier," she said. "Was." And now he shrugged. "Now I mend fences that don't hold." Her mouth tightened the faintest shadow of a smile. "You guided them, those men, through our land." "I did. They killed my people." "I know." Aiyana looked at him fully then, as if measuring whether knowledge could ever equal guilt. "Do you know the name Dasan?" Silas's throat worked. "Yes, he was my father." The words landed heavily. He remembered the report he'd carried, once a name scrawled beside a map of burnt canyons, Dasan deceased. He remembered smoke on the horizon, the sound of orders shouted through it. He hadn't pulled a trigger, but he'd shown them the way. He turned from her, reached for the firewood, stacked near the hearth. "You should eat." "I don't take food from ghosts," she said. "Then take it from the living." He struck a match. The flame caught, then faltered, sputtering as if the air itself refused to burn. He tried again. Same result. Aiyana watched, eyes steady. "The fire remembers," she murmured. "It burns for the clean, not the cursed." He met her gaze. "Maybe it's forgot how." She stepped closer, just enough for her shadow to cross his boots. "Fire doesn't forget. It waits." The second match caught true this time. The wood hissed, then accepted the flame. Light climbed the walls, turning the cabin to amber. Silas ladled beans into a pot, added a strip of dried meat, a pinch of salt. The smell filled the room, smoke, iron hunger. He pushed a tin bowl toward her. "It's not much." She ate slowly, each motion deliberate. When she was done, she set the spoon down and looked at the map tacked to the wall. The paper was old edges, curled, marked with blue pencil roots, and small black X's. Near the bottom, faint but legible, the word Dason. Aiyana rose. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "You marked the path that killed him." Silas said nothing. She stepped closer to the map, reached up and pressed 2 fingers over the name. "Then you owe the land more than me." He pulled the tax free, folded the paper, and shoved it into a drawer. Maybe so. Outside, the light had turned the color of old blood. Coyotes began to call from the flats, long and mournful. The wind raked across the roof, making the boards creak like a man talking in his sleep. Aiyana stood by the door again. "They'll come," she said. "Who? The law? The ones who wear your coat and think it makes them clean." He looked at the faded cavalry jacket hanging by the bed. "They already took everything worth wearing." She shook her head. "No, they'll come because they lost me. You escaped. I was traded." Her tone made the word venom. "They'll kill the men who sold me, then come for whoever holds me last. Then I'll tell them I never did. Will they believe you?" He almost smiled. "No." She studied him for a long moment, then moved toward the bed. "I'll sleep on the floor. Take the bed. I won't owe you. Then consider it rent paid." In silence. She hesitated, then laid down on top of the blanket, still wearing her boots. Her hand rested on the beads at her throat, thumb circling the largest one, the clay ring cracked through the middle. Silas watched the motion until his chest hurt from it. He went outside, needing the air. The sky was purple glass, the stars sharp as flint. He leaned on the porch post, listening. The valley breathed in slow rhythm wind, dust wind again. Somewhere far off, a single note rose, a woman's voice singing against the dark. The tune was broken, scattered by distance, but it reached him all the same. When he stepped back inside, Aiyana's eyes were open. "That song," he said. "Yours?" She shook her head. The wind remembers what the living forgets. He nodded once. Then it'll keep me awake. You should rest, she murmured. I rest when there's nothing left to guard. The fire popped, throwing sparks like tiny comets. She turned on her side, facing the wall. If they come, don't lie for me, she said. Truth has its own aim. I'm not good at aiming anymore. Then maybe the truth will aim for you. He didn't answer. After a while, her breathing steadied, thin and even. Silas sat by the hearth, eyes on the dying flame. Shadows gathered around the room, soft as closing hands. He thought of the map in the drawer, the mark by the river, the man named Hassan, and the circle that had finally come back to him, not as a gun barrel, but as a necklace. Outside, the night thickened. He heard the mule snort once, uneasy. Then came another sound, low, but certain hoofbeats, distant, measured, drawing closer. Silas reached for the rifle, leaning against the wall. The rhythm of the hooves was slow, deliberate, too steady for drifters, too light for traders. Soldiers rode like that. He set the rifle aside, stood and looked once at Aiyana. She hadn't moved, but her hand had slipped from the beads to the knife at her belt. When the knock came, it wasn't timid. 3 raps, hard, precise, authority in everyone. Silas Hale, a voice called. Young, clipped, trained to command. By order of Fort Bowie, any native found outside reservation bounds is to be detained. Open the door. Silas drew a breath, slow as prayer. The fire behind him flared once, then stilled. He met Aiyana's eyes across the dim room. For the first time since she'd fallen at his feet, she looked afraid, but not of them. Of what he might choose. He crossed to the door, fingers on the latch. The valley held its breath. Then he pulled it open. Light spilled across the threshold, a lantern glow, white and cold. A figure stood framed in it, uniform, pressed pistol at his hip, silver insignia catching the dust. Marshal Coyle, the man Silas once called Sir. And behind him the night waited, patient and hungry. The storm had passed, but the desert hadn't forgiven them yet. By the time Silas dragged the half-conscious woman into his cabin, dusk had already drowned the San Simon Valley in bronze light. The air smelled of wet dust and wood smoke, the kind that stayed in a man's clothes long after the wind moved on. He laid her down on the narrow bed, the same one that had once belonged to his brother. Her wrists were raw where the ropes had cut, her lips cracked. Even covered in grime, she carried a kind of fierce beauty that wasn't gentle, it warned. When he reached for a canteen, her eyes opened, black, sharp, alive. Don't touch me, she rasped. You'll die if I don't. Then let the desert have what it paid for. Her defiance almost made him smile. Instead, he poured water into a tin cup and left it within her reach. You drink when you're ready. Not my business if you don't. The fire in the hearth spat and shifted, shadows crawling over the walls. Silence gathered again, thick, alive, almost holy. Outside, coyotes called to one another like ghosts keeping score. When she finally reached for the cup, her hands trembled. She drank slowly, watching him. You were a soldier, scout, once. For them, he didn't answer. He didn't have to. Her voice thinned. Then you know what they did to mine. I know what men do to other men when someone tells them it's for peace. She held his gaze a moment longer, then looked toward the window where red dust still drifted through the slats. Peace, she whispered. Your people use that word like a gun. He turned back to the fire. And yours like a wound. Hours passed that way, quiet, watchful. He replaced the bandage on her wrist with a torn strip of his own shirt. When her eyes fluttered closed, he saw the faint trace of a tattoo along her collarbone, a thunderbird with 2 heads carved in ink, the color of dusk. He'd seen it before on the map's territory no white man was supposed to cross. He didn't mention it. He didn't move her either. The fire's glow wavered across her face, revealing both pride and exhaustion, a fragile mix that made his chest hurt in a way he hadn't felt since the war. Outside, the wind howled, pulling at the shutters. He poured himself a measure of whiskey and sat down by the door. Somewhere between the flames and the storm, he drifted into a half-sleep filled with old sounds, gunfire, hoofbeats, his brother's voice calling from the canyon. When he woke, the cabin was still. The fire burned low. The woman Aiyana she'd whispered once in fever was gone. He bolted upright, snatched his revolver, and stepped outside. The moon laid a silver spine across the land. At the well, a shadow moved. Aiyana stood barefoot in the dust, her wrists unbound, now holding the bucket rope between her hands. "You planning to run?" he asked. She didn't startle. "If I were you, wouldn't catch me." "Maybe not. But you'd die trying." She looked toward the mesa, the horizon, bleeding pale. "Then I'd die free." He walked closer, slow boots, whispering in the sand. "That's what you call this freedom. I call it breathing on my own term." Her voice cracked on the last word, but her chin didn't drop. The desert wind caught her hair and turned it into a dark flame. "You got people out there?" he asked. "Once. Maybe still." "Then, let me help you find them." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I'd trust a man who wears their dust on his boots?" He glanced down at his boots, then at her bare feet. "Dust belongs to no one." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the faint smell of juniper and the far cry of a coyote. Then Aiyana said quietly, "You keep this place for ghosts." He almost laughed. "Maybe they keep it for me." The next morning broke hard and dry. Aiyana was sitting by the fire pit outside, hair braided roughly, her back straight. She was cleaning his rifle, wrong but careful. "You should eat," he said, setting down a bowl of bean. "I don't eat a man's food unless I mean to stay." "Then call it the deserts." She hesitated, then took the bowl. They ate in silence. Above them a hawk cut slow circles through the white sky. When she spoke again, it was without looking at him. "Those men who brought me, they said your name." "Carter. Silas Carter," he said. "Most call me nothing at all. They feared you. They should have feared themselves." Her mouth curved faintly, almost humorless. "You talk like a preacher who lost his church." "Maybe I did. Only the sermons were gunfire." Before she could answer, the faint echo of hooves rippled across the valley. Not thunder, not far. Aiyana stiffened. Silas rose, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Dust kicked up beyond the scrub line, 3 riders, silhouettes against the sun. "Stay inside," he said. "They've come for me. Maybe for both of us." He stepped into the cabin, grabbed his rifle and the small pouch of cartridges. Aiyana followed against his order, standing in the doorway, her face set like carved stone. "Marshal Coyle," she said when the lead rider came into view. His uniform gleamed brass, catching light. "You know him?" Silas asked. "I know the kind." Coyle dismounted with slow precision, brushing dust from his sleeve. 2 soldiers flanked him, rifles at ease, but ready. "Mr. Carter," he called. "Heard you've been keeping company you shouldn't." Silas stepped forward, rifle low. "You can keep your hearing to yourself, Marshal." Coyle smiled without warmth. "That woman's wanted for arson and murder near San Simon Bridge. You don't want to be part of that story." Silas looked back at Aiyana. "That true?" Her voice was steady. "They burned our grain store. I burned their bridge." Coyle's eyes flickered. "You confess easy for someone who'll hang." The air tightened. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Silas said, "You'll hang first if you take one more step toward this porch." Coyle's hand dropped to his pistol. "You'd stand for her. For an Apache slave." "She's no one's slave," Silas said, "least of all yours." The hammer clicks overlapped, the kind of sound men don't forget. The 2 soldiers froze. For a breath, the world held its knife edge. Then Aiyana stepped between them. "If blood is what you came for," she said quietly, "mine is enough." Silas's jaw locked. "Get back inside." She didn't move. "You don't fight storms with guns, Silas." Coyle's voice sharpened. "You're both fools. The cavalry rides at dawn. You can't run far." He swung into his saddle, nodded to his men, and turned toward the horizon. Dust swallowed them whole. When the sound faded, Aiyana let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "They'll come back," she said. "I know. You could still hand me over." "I could. Why don't you—" He met her eyes. "Because I'm tired of choosing the easy kind of right." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he thought she might speak, but she only turned away. That night, neither of them slept much. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with what was coming. She sat by the window, tracing symbols into the dust on the sill, circles, lines, birds. He watched from the firelight, trying to read them like maps. Finally he said, "You draw prayers." She shook her head. "Memories. So they don't leave before I do." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she rose and crossed the room, moving slow. The fire cast her shadow long against the wall, dark and alive. She stopped beside him, close enough for the scent of her hair smoke and sage to fill the space between them. "When they come," she said softly, "don't die for me." He looked up. "Then what would you have me do live?" "That's the harder thing." Her voice trembled just once, and then she stepped back into the dark. Silas sat there long after she'd lain down. Outside, the desert whispered through the shutters, dry and endless. He stared into the coals until their red light blurred, until every face he'd ever failed began to fade behind the heat. By dawn he made his choice. The rifle stayed on the wall. The horses were saddled. When Aiyana stepped outside, the valley was pink with first light. "You mean to run?" she asked. "Not run. Move before the fire catches. To where east, maybe. There's a river there that still remembers shade." She looked past him toward the rising sun. "Then we move with it." He handed her his brother's coat. "It'll fit." She slipped it on. It didn't, but she didn't say so. As they rode out across the red valley, the wind rose again, dragging the smell of dust and iron. Behind them, the cabin shrank into the heat, like a story being forgotten. Ahead, the mesa caught fire with morning light, and though Silas didn't believe in signs, he found himself whispering a word he hadn't used in years: mercy. Aiyana heard it. She turned slightly in the saddle, her braid lifting in the wind. "Mercy isn't for the dead," she said. "It's for those still learning how to live." Silas nodded. "Then we'd better start." They rode into the sun, two shadows lengthening across a land that had never known peace, carrying with them a promise neither quite understood yet, a promise the desert itself might one day keep. The road east bent through broken country mesas, half-eaten by time cactus spines catching the light like teeth. By noon, the wind had turned cruel again, pushing grit against their faces, until every breath tasted of stone. Silas rode ahead, hat pulled low, eyes scanning the horizon. Aiyana kept pace beside him, her braid snapping behind her like a black whip. Neither had spoken since dawn. Words had weight, and the land was already carrying too much. Around mid-afternoon, they stopped at a dry creek bed. Silas dismounted, checking the horse's hooves. Aiyana knelt by a boulder, scraping a small line in the sand with her knife, short, deliberate strokes forming a symbol like wings. He watched. "That a warning, a promise," she said. "To who?" "The land." Silas poured a trickle of water from his canteen into her cupped hands. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving his. The heat between them was quiet, not tender, not safe, but alive. They moved on. Toward evening, smoke rose from the horizon, a thin gray column, too steady to be natural. Aiyana saw it first. "Cavalry fire," she said. "They've started burning." Silas narrowed his eyes. "They're driving you back toward the line." "Then we don't go back." They pushed into the low hills. The sun was falling red and swollen, turning the world the color of old blood. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley, a small ranch house below its corral, broken, the well half collapsed. "Used to be a relay stop," Silas said. "No one's worked it since the raids." "Then it's ours till morning," she said. They led the horses inside the half-roofed barn. The walls groaned in the wind. Silas checked the rafters, found them stable enough. He lit a small lamp. The glow flickered across dust and ruin. Aiyana found a rusted kettle, filled it with what little water they had left. "We shouldn't stay long," she said. "We'll move at dawn. Dawn is when they ride." Her voice carried no fear, only knowledge. Silas stared into the lamp's small flame. "You've been running a long time." She shrugged. "All my life." She took off his brother's coat and folded it carefully by the door. Her shirt beneath was torn at the shoulder, showing the faint lines of another scar curved like a crescent moon. "What happened?" he asked. "Soldiers," she said simply. "They came from my father's village. They called it relocation." He felt the word hit him like a hammer. Relocation, he'd heard it too often in the service, said by men who'd never left their tents. Aiyana went on, her voice flat. "My father fought. They called him Dasan leader. He told me to run east with my mother. We didn't make it past the canyon. He swallowed hard. What happened to her? She looked back. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend air. Silas knelt beside the fire pit, striking a spark. You think your father's still alive. If he isn't, the land keeps him. And if he is, then he's waiting for me to stop running. The flames caught small but bright. She sat beside him, cross-legged, watching. Her hands trembled once, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He poured the last of the beans into the kettle. Eat something, he said. You always feed people who hate you, only the ones who need it. She smiled, faint, but real. You're strange, Silas Carter. I've been called worse. They ate in silence. Outside, the desert wind softened, carrying the far-off cry of an owl. The sound made Aiyana close her eyes briefly. That's a night messenger, she murmured. It means someone's spirit still walks. Yours, maybe yours. Later, when the fire had burned low, Silas stepped outside. The stars burned sharp over the valley. He felt the weight of the rifle on his shoulder, the ache in his hands, the pull of something he couldn't name. He heard her behind him. You still don't trust me, she said. I don't trust anyone who can walk through hell and not look back. Then you'll never trust yourself. He turned to her. You think I'm like you? I think you were once. The words hit deeper than he expected. She looked up at the stars. You carry ghosts, Silas. So do I. The difference, his mind still talked. He wanted to ask what they said, but before he could, the night broke, hooves pounding far below. The sound rose from the valley floor, echoing off the rocks. Lantern light flashed small moving dots, 6, maybe more. Soldiers, he said. Aiyana was already moving. They tracked the horses. They doused the fire, packed fast. Silas slung the saddle, loaded his revolver, and looked toward the east ridge. The moon was low. Shadows stretched long. We can make the pass, he said. They'll see us. Then we move quiet. They slipped into the dark, leading the horses up the narrow trail. Dust clouded under their boots, soft and treacherous. Below, voices shouted orders, curses, the bark of a sergeant. A shot cracked the silence, whistling past Silas's shoulder. He turned, fired once into the dark. Echoes answered. The valley came alive with thunder. Go, he hissed. Aiyana ran beside him, sure-footed despite the incline. Her braid whipped his arm as she turned to fire a borrowed pistol. 2 flashes, 2 riders down. She didn't stop moving. They reached the top of the ridge, lungs burning. Ahead lay open desert, a vast stretch of nothing under the moonlight. Behind them, Coyle's men regrouped. They'll ride us down, Silas said. Then we ride through. They mounted, kicked hard, and tore across the plain. Wind cut through their clothes. Grit stung their eyes. Aiyana rode, bareheaded hair, streaming face, lit by the moon like a blade. Silas stole a glance. She looked more alive in danger than any preacher in prayer. Shots echoed again. One slug tore through Silas's hat brim. Another struck the ground beside Aiyana's horse. She didn't flinch. They won't shoot true in moonlight, she shouted. I'm not planning to test. That they veered toward the mesas, riding low through gullies and broken stone. The chase fell behind, fading into the wind. When at last they stopped, the world had gone still again. Both horses shuddered, sweat steaming in the cold air. Aiyana slid down, first breathing hard. You hit, not yet. Then we're lucky. He tied the reins to a juniper branch and leaned against the rock. The desert stretched, endless silver sand, dark sky. For the first time he realized how far they were from anything human. Aiyana sank down beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees. They'll follow at dawn, she said. Then we keep moving before dawn. She glanced sideways. You always run from what chases you, only when it deserves to win. That earned a quiet laugh. She reached for her necklace, the double-headed thunderbird, and turned it between her fingers. The carved wings caught the light. This was my father's, she said. He said it belonged to the wind. Silas watched her hand. And I belong to what listens. She looked at him, then eyes dark, steady. You think saving me will fix your ghosts? No. Then why? He hesitated, then said, because I didn't save the last one. Her gaze softened. Your brother. He nodded once. Died because I followed orders instead of truth. She reached out, brushed her fingers over the scar near his jaw, then stopped following. He caught her wrist, not rough, not gentle. "You don't know what that costs." "I do," she whispered. "Everything worth keeping does." The air between them shifted tight alive. Then she leaned back, eyes closing. "Sleep, Silas. The desert doesn't forgive the weak, but it forgets the brave." He didn't answer. He watched her until her breathing evened, then looked toward the horizon. The moon hung low, and the first thin edge of dawn cut the sky in half. He knew the chase wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt something like direction, not the kind drawn on maps, but the kind you only earn after being lost long enough. He whispered into the wind, not sure who he was speaking to. "We'll make it, brother. This time we'll make it." Aiyana stirred half awake. "You said something just talking to ghosts. Then tell them to keep quiet. Morning's coming." And with that she turned in her blanket face toward the rising sun, while Silas sat guard through the last cold hour before day, rifle on his knee, guilt on his heart, and the woman beside him who had somehow turned survival into faith. The light grew soft and red, touching the edge of her cheek, the metal of his gun, and the desert between them. It wasn't peace, but it was promise. Dawn cracked like a slow fuse across the mesa. The desert glowed pink and hollow, a world that didn't forgive, only endured. Silas was already saddling the horses when Aiyana woke. Her hair was heavy with dust, her voice rough. "They'll find us by noon, I know. You plan to meet them." He cinched the strap tight. "I plan to stop running." They broke camp in silence, riding west toward the rocks that cut the valley into a place locals called Widow's Spine. Jagged, narrow, a graveyard for cavalry hooves. By midday heat rose in waves that shimmered like ghosts. Aiyana's horse stumbled once, breathing hard. She slid off, walked beside it. "You could leave me," she said. "I already tried that once," he answered. "Didn't take." They stopped at a half-collapsed waterhole. The air smelled faintly of iron. Silas filled the canteen, handed it to her. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "When they come," she said, "don't fight them. They'll shoot first." He looked past her shoulder. "That's the only thing they ever learn to do right." The wind changed. Then, sudden, sharp, carrying dust, and something worse sound. Hooves. 6, maybe 8. Aiyana's eyes narrowed. Marshal Coyle. "Faster than I'd hoped," Silas muttered. They moved for cover, two bodies against the stone face of the canyon. The sound grew, the kind that fills a man's ribs before his ears. Then voices clipped, official, angry. Coyle rode at the front hatch, shadowing his eyes. He reined in when he saw the tracks leading into the spine. "They're here," he barked. "Fan out." Silas gritted his teeth. "Stay low. I'm not hiding." "You don't win a storm by standing in it." Her gaze was calm, cold. "Maybe I am the storm." Before he could answer, a rifle cracked. The bullet tore rock inches from his head. Silas fired back, once deliberate, and ducked. Coyle's men scattered for position, their silhouettes black against the light. The fight broke open, fast echoes snapping through stone dust, blooming like smoke. Silas moved down the ridge, eyes steady, picking shots, the way a man picks truth. Slow, careful, unforgiving. Aiyana crouched behind him, reloading with practiced hands. "They'll circle. Let them." Coyle shouted over the gunfire. "Carter, you've got no end to this, but one. Step out and hand her over." Silas called back, "You'll have to shoot through both of us. That can be arranged." The marshal's next shot hit close splinters, cutting Silas's cheek. He wiped blood with the back of his hand, steady. "You can't save her," Coyle yelled. "You'll hang beside her." "Maybe," Silas said quietly, "but I'll hang clean." Aiyana's voice cut and low and fierce. "They'll flank left. Give me your rifle." He hesitated. "You can't." She tore it from his grip, climbed to the higher ledge before he could stop her. The wind whipped her braid into the light. She took aim, one knee down, steady as the mesa itself. The first shot dropped a rider from his saddle. The second hit the marshal's canteen, bursting it open in a spray of metal and water. Coyle ducked, furious. "You're making it worse for him," she shouted back. He made it worse for himself when he started calling murder peace. Silas climbed after her. "We have to move. They'll chase anyway. Then we make it count." They scrambled toward the upper ridge. A shot grazed Aiyana's shoulder. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Silas caught her, dragged her behind a boulder. Blood seeped through her sleeve, dark and fast. "Hold still. Keep fighting." I said still. He tore a strip from his shirt, pressed it tight. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry out. Below the gunfire slowed men reloading, reorganizing. Silas looked at the sky noon. Now the sun cruel and white. If we make it past that ridge, we can lose them in the cliffs. Aiyana's eyes met his. And if we don't, then we give them a story they won't forget. They moved together, slipping between rocks, the sound of pursuit closing again. Coyle's voice echoed closer. "Now you can't run forever." Silas shouted back, "I'm not running anymore." They reached the ridge's top, just as the cavalry crested the far rise. Aiyana turned breath ragged. "We can't outgun them," no, Silas said, "but we can outlast them." He looked down at the canyon floor, a drop sheer enough to break a man but not kill if the landing was right. He handed her his revolver. "You trust me?" he asked. "With the wind," she said. He took her hand, counted to 3, and they jumped. The fall tore sound from their lung. They hit hard dust, exploding pain, sharp but real. Above, shouts echoed, fading. No one followed. The canyon hid them now, deep and silent. Aiyana groaned, pushing up on one elbow. Still alive, unfortunately. She laughed, weak but genuine. They limped into the shadowed gorge where the air turned cool and damp. A trickle of water ran between stones, small but enough. She knelt, dipped her hands and drank. Then she looked back toward the sunlight above. "They'll keep hunting. Let them. We'll move east at night." He sat beside her, breathing slow. "You still think your father's alive?" "Yes. And if he isn't, then I'll find the part of the world that remembers him." Silas looked at her for a long moment. "You sound like someone who already knows where she belongs." She smiled faintly. "And you sound like a man who doesn't." He looked toward the canyon mouth, where wind carried a faint hum, half music, half memory. "Maybe that's why we met. To lose ourselves. To stop pretending we already were." The light shifted, sliding gold across the rocks. Aiyana leaned back against the stone wall, exhaustion settling over her like dusk. Her voice softened. "When this ends, you should go home. I don't have one. Then make one." He turned toward her, saw the streak of blood drying on her arm, the dust on her face, the quiet fire still burning in her eyes. He reached out, brushed the grit from her cheek. "Maybe this is home," he said. She didn't answer, but when the last light faded, her hand found his in the dark. The desert wind rose again, whispering over the rocks like a tired prayer, carrying with it the sound of horses, far away, of men still searching, and of two people who had already decided that mercy, however fleeting, was worth dying for. By the time they reached the San Pedro bend, the world had turned gold and gray, the kind of light that made everything look both holy and die. They came out of the canyon, limping, clothes torn, dust caked their shadows long on the plain. Ahead, cottonwoods shimmered green beside a narrow strip of water. Smoke rose from a small camp. Aiyana stopped first. Her breath caught, soft but certain. "He's here," she whispered. Silas followed her gaze. 3 riders waited near the water's edge, one older, wrapped in a dark blanket stitched with silver thread. His face was carved with years and weather, but his eyes were alive. When they drew closer, the old man lifted his hand. "We come for the daughter of Chief Dasan," he said in slow, even English. Aiyana slid off her horse, the motion neither rushed nor hesitant. "Yasa," she said, voice breaking on the name. "You live." The elder's mouth curved faintly. "We all live until the land forgets us." Behind him, 2 younger warriors dismounted, standing quiet. Silas stayed a step back, hand near his belt, not from fear but from habit. Yasa's gaze moved to him. "You are the white man who cut her bonds." "I am." "You harmed her, no?" The elder nodded. "Then part of your breath belongs to her now. Among us, a life saved is a life tied." Silas met his eyes. "Then I'll carry it." Yasa studied him for a long time, then turned to Aiyana. "Your father waits at the river. He is weak, but his spirit still walks ahead of him." Her knees almost gave. Silas reached to steady her, but she moved on her own, walking toward the cottonwoods. Beneath their shade lay Dasan, the old chief,